Okay, fine.
And we're recording. Hello, and you're very welcome. My name is John Ryan with Broadsheet, and this is Tomorrow Tonight. You give us 20 minutes exactly, and we'll give you tomorrow tonight. And with us tonight is human rights lawyer David Langwallner. David, good evening. David,
good evening, John.
Oh,
thank you for inviting me, by the way.
Well, thank you for coming. David, I'll just give you your quick bio. David is a graduate of Harvard Law School and the London School of Economics, but also Trinity, right?
Yeah.
He's a barrister in London, in Chambers in London, and lectures in jurisprudence at Middlesex University. How I got to know David only about a week ago, 2 weeks, through Frank Armstrong at the excellent Cassandra Voices. David's a published author, writes monthly columns in the Village magazine, and he writes for Cassandra Voices. And in 2015, you were Irish lawyer.
And Council magazine,
Which?
Yeah.
And David was a lawyer.
No, I also write for Council magazine.
Oh, right. Sorry. Oh, and Council magazine. Yeah, I beg your pardon. That's for barristers, right?
Yeah, but given some things that are happening, I think a legal perspective is important. Yeah.
Okay. Well, David, you're eminently qualified to bring us through tomorrow's papers. Will you do that for us?
Absolutely. Sure.
Wonderful. Okay. Can you see that? Okay. Sorry.
One thing. Yeah.
It will come up now. 1 second.
Yeah.
Now there. Can you see that?
Okay.
Can you see?
Yeah, I can see the Irish Examiner, and
okay.
Yeah, it says firms ready to warned to ready for months of closure. And of course, one of the fundamental problems with the pandemic is, if we look at that more important headline in a way, from the perspective of Cork people, is that the pandemic is creating massive inequality, the destruction of social medium enterprises, and the destruction of small businesses, and nothing's been done to save them. And we have presently an eviction moratorium. How long will that last for? Where people cannot afford their mortgages or their rents in a hyperinflated market, and where nothing has been done to bail out small businesses, and the money has been channeled to Canadian American vulture funds, siphoning money out of the country on the behest of Goldman Sachs. And so I think the Examiner has got a firm Cork grasp on reality, which is the first headline is the local issue. Firms warned to ready for months of closure. What's it going to mean for the local people of Cork and its environs? And then the other sub-headline in the Examiner is, of course, the issue of the moment, which is violent pro-Trump mob storms US Capitol. You showed me, I think, before we went on air, this tremendous image in the Daily Telegraph, of all things.
I'll go down again.
It's a very important image, I think, because the Daily Telegraph is with the Guardian, the paper of record really in Britain since the Murdochs took over the Times, in that the Telegraph represents conservative opinion of a moderate, sometimes extreme, but often fact-based level, and the Guardian the opposite. And that picture that they have shown, I can't see it at the moment, but that picture that they have shown in the Telegraph of what's happened this evening, Milan Kundera and Black of Havel all check things get incredibly dangerous. And in this particular situation, that picture in the Telegraph, and the picture is better than 1,000 words, really, in a way, is a situation unparalleled in a Western democracy. And since the early 70s, when Franco lost power in Spain, and there was a bunch of colonels came into the Spanish Parliament carrying guns, and or the González Movida social democratic revolution in Spain. Now, that is what we're talking about in the world's leading democracy. and with someone who is in critically ill condition after being shot in the Capitol today. And Donald Trump afterwards said he condemned it in muted terms. But one senses that what has happened today is historically very significant in American terms. It is at the very least a shot across the bows. It is at the very least a kind of warning sign that we are not going away and our voices of a certain constituency have to be heard. Now, I'd rather be non-judgmental about what that constituency is at the moment, but it's kind of like at one level an alt-right Boston Tea Party, or at another level a kind of sense of total dissatisfaction. But if Trump has engineered this or approved of it, it is also a statement, is it not, to everybody that he's not going to necessarily relinquish power. Either he's not going to relinquish power, period, or he's not going to relinquish power without even more of a fight, whatever that means. And perhaps in the classical American sense, without some sort of a deal. And there was somebody who came on this evening, Sky News, talking about Donald doesn't like the idea of his tax affairs and his previous history being investigated. But
do you see any merit, David? Do you see any merit? Do you see any merit in Trump's allegations of election fraud?
Well, one doesn't know in America at this stage. If you go back to Gore Vidal's kind of non-partisan political comment about the Republic of Amnesia, there is no doubt from Democrats and Republicans, the entire concept of American democracy has failed. The appeal of Trump, what some people call the hillbilly elegy, the appeal to blue-collar America, at one level is a total dissatisfaction with the failures of the rather superficial liberalism of the Democratic Party of America. It's all well and good to be in favor of, and one has to be careful about this, and without being judgmental, it's all well and good in favor to be in favor of gay rights or abortion rights or affirmative action, necessarily. And these are perhaps, some people might say, good things. But once whoever's caused it, and it's liberals and conservatives in America have caused it, the level of economic and social devastation that people of all shades and colors in America are suffering, you can understand a level of populist disenchantment. The problem with populism is it becomes proto-fascist, and we're entering an age of tribalism and extremes where everybody's screaming at each other and nobody's being reasonable. And it's an enormous problem. But I think, to echo Gore Vidal's famous statement, I think America as a concept and American democracy has failed. If there is any form of push or coup d'etat, then the ripple-on effect in world terms will be catastrophic, because if the citadel of democracy itself is no longer democratic, well, you can see copycats and mimics, and you already see in Hungary and Poland proto-fascist governments. So it's a catastrophe. But now, on the other hand, it could just be a one-off incident of a lot of people getting loud. I think not.
Okay. We've got about 9 minutes left, so I want you to have a look at The Sun tomorrow, which is regarding the lockdown. Third time lucky. We have.
Well, really, I mean, a point you brought up with me is, and it's the second thing in The Sun today, and one shouldn't dismiss The Sun completely. Schools open for Leaving Cert kids. I mean, in a way, it's an optimistic thing to say, but of course, it is the children of the universe who are being destroyed by their educational impairment as a result of lockdown at one level. And of course, lockdown is creating, as Jonathan Sumption and myself have argued separately, the destruction of civil liberties, rights of movement, and the basic necessities of free citizenship, which we have become accustomed to. And it's almost like a catch-22 situation. And catch-22 is the guy is told to go on a mission, on a suicide mission. He says, I won't go. And you can only not go if you're insane. And of course, his decision not to go means he's not insane. How does one work in a situation where one has the virus? In other words, by working, you're endangering your life. But if you don't, there's no level of support or bailing out. And particularly in a neoliberal country like Ireland, where wealth is cartelized ever the more so to a narrow percentile and band of people, you're creating impossible life structures for children, for families, in overinflated accommodation structures, without a proper capacity for development, without the ability to develop properly as human beings, and to
somebody like you did, and Lord Sumption with, say, classic liberal values, you would be termed...
I'm different to him. I don't have neoliberal values. I have classic liberal values, but they also are social democratic values. But he is right. He's been very brave to speak out about this. I mean, emergency powers are terrifically dangerous. In Ireland, we declared a state of national emergency in 1939. It was not undeclared till 1973, and then they introduced a new one.
Yeah, which I gather is still in technically in place.
Yeah, but they don't enforce it. But once you give politicians and state bureaucrats and fascists to enforce these things, I mean, on the sly in Britain, they introduced counter-terrorism legislation in the process of doing so, restricting people to their houses based on no proof whatsoever. I say you're a terrorist. But at this stage, anybody says anybody else is something they disagree with. And, you know, when you talk about the perpetual extension of lockdown, you know, and with the virus and viruses to come, we are entering a kind of potentially a kind of corporate fascist Singaporean democracy in Ireland, where the basic things that made Irish people Irish, the things we're good at, giving out, dissidence, crack, anti-authoritarianism, things warped into the national character from Flann O'Brien to James Joyce to anybody really.
Well, that was
and the institution.
Obviously a caricature that is not aged well. I mean, certainly the vast majority of the people who read our site are lockstep with the restrictions, with the lockdowns, with anything.
Well, I think over a period of time, people have become, and it's been a feature of education institutions for a long period of time, a lot of experience in education, they've become overly compliant and overly cautious, working within a neoliberal universe, which penalizes them extremely. And so, and Ireland's a particularly extreme example. The other thing which I don't like, let's be best boy in the school. Let's do the most extreme things. Well, fine and well and good if you're a corporate banker or part of the ruling elite of Ireland, but not if you're anybody else. And it's a dehumanization process. Now, that doesn't mean you don't consider considerations of ordre public or public safety, or that people shouldn't behave responsibly. And it's completely wrong that people commingle in massive pubs in the light of all of this. It is a threat. But, you know, how destructive is it? Yes, it is dangerous and unquantifiable, but it is not like the Black Plague.
Well, this evening,
and I think we've engendered...
I mean, there does seem to be a secondary purpose, or at least they're taking advantage of a crisis. Particularly,
well, a lot of people seem to be.
Well, the Irish pub represents more than just the Irish pub. I mean, it really is. I mean,
no, it does.
Around the world, it genuinely is.
Well, it is a source of sociability and interaction. Let me give you a very specific example.
Really
My late great friend David,
Spanish people, and they really love the Irish pub. It's just something.
Yeah, but my late great friend Adrian Hardam, Supreme Court judge, he said, David, there's a quiet little snug down the road. We'll walk in there. No one will record us. We'll put our phones outside with the barman. He's a friend of mine. Let's talk.
Okay.
And if they're confining us to this, because this conversation is recorded and they're looking at it, and the Stasi Department of Injustice and the idiocracy of Fine Gael, blue shirt Nazis, let's be careful, are recording all of it and evaluate accordingly what to do as they do. If you're not recorded, and if you're in a pub and if you're talking to people casually, and that's why the debating societies traditionally were great places in Dublin, because of that. And I think they're stopping people communicating on terms they can't control.
Well, it does seem that way. And anyway, we promised to actually sort of review tomorrow's papers as well. So we've got 3 minutes to go through.
Oh, okay, well, maybe I should do that. Yeah.
No,
well, I did to a point.
Chatty
chaos is pro of U.S. Capitol. We've dealt with that. Okay.
Yeah. Assault on Democracy, which is this, I think the same headline in the Telegraph. Anarchy in the
Well, it's very interesting. If you go back to that independent symbol again, it's quite interesting. If you just go back to it, it's extraordinary what limited bonds Americans have. And this is a person showing the tattered flag, not quite the Jasper Johns version, but the flag. Very few things unite Americans. The Constitution, in a rather holier than thou sense, a sense of civic decency and perhaps Christian decency, and the flag. And I suppose it would be better on the assault on democracy, rather than having a pure flag, he had Jasper John's tattered American flag, because the democracy's absolutely destroyed.
Yeah, well, I mean, and he would say that the democracy was destroyed on November the 3rd. I mean, that's, you know, that's there.
Well, I think it's been destroyed for, I think this is American democracy at all sorts of levels is, I mean, it's extraordinary scenes. I mean, this is, one should photo shoot if you can do this, or crop or something like that. The pictures in the 1970s in the Spanish court.
Yes, yeah, I remember.
Yeah, I mean, because again, it's people's lack of historical consciousness that they don't put two and two together. It's exactly the same sort of thing, replicated in a much more.
He was quite comical looking, though, wasn't he? He had the Guardia Civil hat, or the, you know, that strange Spanish. The guy,
but Mussolini was a figure of fun and veneration across most of Europe.
I know. I mean, the guy with the gun in the Spanish Parliament, he looked.
Oh yes, he was. He was a bad poster boy for the insurrection.
He didn't get much.
Well, I think the Spectator's headline is rather revealing, isn't it? One wonders about the vaccines, not least because one wonders to what extent they're going to be effective and to what extent we're parts of manipulation. I mean, these are drug companies and pharmaceutical companies. They're in a kind of race amongst each other, and they're bumping up their own effectiveness. And what will be the side effects? And what about underlying conditions? Quite apart from if they are going to be effective, and particularly if they're going to be effective against mutant viruses and all of the springing up mutant viruses. And when you talk about a race against time, I think it's an extraordinarily important point. It's a generalist statement. Human lives are being desecrated. People are dying. 1,000 people died in Britain today. It is not a situation to be underestimated. It is a race against time in terms of what Lord Attenborough might perceive as humanity. It's a form of what John Gray in Britain talks about, Malthusian liquidation, quoting the 17th century economist who Jonathan Swift gave out about. The gradual disrespect of humanity and associative obligations, so that you allow people to die in a hospital corridor.
Yeah, I know.
And you don't resource.
But also,
and you pat a nurse in the head, and she does tremendous work. And she, three people today I know, including an intern who worked for me, have contracted COVID.
Okay. I'm sorry about that, but I mean, the people.
Right, I think you'll be fine in a way.
Would all be regarded as Malthusians. Bill Gates, particularly, would be a population control freak, you could say. You know, I mean, it's
Well, I think the control of Palo Alto and those Californian gigs has been a total disgrace. They should never have been taken seriously in the first place. Um, I call Bill Gates the famous non-Harvard graduate because, of course, he didn't. And they think in terms of numbers and computer screens. They don't think in terms of people.
No.
And the only way he thinks in terms of people, I think, is, starving babies in Africa that I can cleanse and have a photo op with. Now, in fairness to him,
No, no,
he
no,
does
no.
things in his
Okay.
nondescript way. He thinks things are getting weird now. Well,
No,
he caused the weirdness.
he is, I wouldn't say morbidly obsessed, but he is obsessed about the world's population, as a lot of those guys are. I mean, it is a fact. That's what they are interested in.
Yes,
And yet they want
but it's a bit like, well, if they're so obsessed with it, why did they allow Goldman Sachs and neoliberalism to take over? And why are people like Bannon and others contemplating the idea of building cities in the sea, or sectioning off humanity as they live in compounds? It's very, I'm all in favor of the little person. I never want to be a haute bourgeoisie person. When one starts talking about people in abstractions, one's a bit like Orson Welles at the top of the Riesenrad in Graham Greene or Carol Reed's film The Third Man. Look at the little dots. I think numbers and computer geeks like Bill Gates should be kept firmly in their place. They're not statesmen. They're not literate people. They're not that bright people. They're policy wonks.
Yeah, well,
and
I
at
think
best,
there's a more sinister motive being placed on them. I'm just putting that out there in terms of it's race against time.
I don't know. I've never been part of that culture. I mean, to some extent, I agree with you from a distance. I know that there's a famous book by David Eggers called The Circle, where they're like a cult, or like the Church of Scientology. They have a form of interaction based on coffee cups, geekiness, work, tech.
But David, enough about broadsheets. I think we're going to have to call it a night. The final story in the Star. It's some good news and some bad news. Claps back. It's the health service clapping in the evening.
Yes, but I was in a walk in the Surrey woods, and I met this guy at the end of it. He was very nice. He said, first lockdown, they clapped for the NHS and was enthusiastic. Second lockdown, it was ritualistic. And do they really care about the NHS doctor or nurse, and one lives next door to me, who drops dead because they have to contract COVID by dealing with all these people? Last thing I want to say, I said to you, I said at the beginning, but it's really important. And my Gaelic is much better than people think it is, but it's slightly imperfect. This is January 6th. It's Little Christmas. And I want to quote two things. In the town in Austria where my cousins live, they have a celebration of Little Christmas where they have these children with kites and illuminated kites. And of course, in Ireland, it's Nolig no Hone. Is that right? Yeah.
Nolig Naman.
Nolig Naman. It is time in Irish and Austrian terms to think about the little people. Yeah, it is time to think about the people who, whether the NHS workers or children or people of poverty or inequality who are suffering from all of this, and be given tokenistic inducements with a pat on the back as they risk their lives. It is time to recalibrate things at Little Christmas.
On that very festive and happy note, David Langwallner, thank you so much. And
thank you for inviting me. After the reception, no one else will.
We'd love to have you on maybe next week or the week after. Go through the paper.
Fine, whenever you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you.
Bye bye.